On tonight's Cover One Buffalo podcast, Aaron and I will be talking about the defensive backs for this 2024 Buffalo Bills season. But first, our guys, Handsome Jack.
Broadcasting live to Bills Mafia worldwide with Greg Tompsett and Aaron Quinn.
Welcome to the NFL. Doesn't matter what's happened before today. Today's a brand new day. It's a brand new season.
Your number one podcast for objective Buffalo Bills coverage. No matter where you are, we got you covered.
Good evening and welcome to the Cover One Buffalo podcast. You are joining your host, Greg Tompsett, along with my partner in crime, Aaron Quinn. Aaron, this is our final position preview of the offseason. Does that mean we've made it? Have we made it out of the long winter?
Yes, but no, also, because we've still got some time and it feels like forever away, even though it's coming right up. But I love the way we did it this year because we saved the best for last, right? Like DBs. Who doesn't love talking about defensive backs?
Yeah.
Or is it just me? Am I just a niche market?
Maybe a little. I will say it is kind of weird this year because, I mean, Trey White, Micah Hyde, Jordan Poyer have been such like staples of not only this team, but obviously of the defensive backfield, and the level of play that they consistently brought was the buoy of this defense. You talked about it last week with, is that the pivot to the linebackers? Are they now kind of that central, connection point to the rest of the team? That was Poyer and Hyde. Poyer and Hyde was the central, rallying point of this defense for so long. And now I'm still excited. We're going to talk about some of the other pieces that are here and what's new and everything, but it is different. It is different to now talk through. And I will say there's, I think if we're being honest, there's the most projection, assumption, and hope we've had to build into this defensive backfield, where that was the thing we could count on forever. Like, that's going to be fine. I hope these other guys work out. Now there's the most projection and hope that we've had there in quite a while.
Yeah, and you nailed it too with Trey White. Obviously, the first pick with Sean McDermott coming in, it's been a staple, even with having the injuries that he's had over the last few years, but was a staple in that defensive back room. But John Butler, also losing John Butler is a big part of this conversation, along with the safeties, because he was a big part of the success of that room and of guys like a Levi Wallace outplaying his ability, of a Dane Jackson going out and getting a big contract like he did, of the development of some of these guys like Jordan Poyer and Micah Hyde, who weren't household names before they came to Buffalo. So that development in that room, I still believe in Sean McDermott and also Bobby Babich, who has worked with defensive backs. And if there is a position group I know hope is not a plan, and you're the first one to tell me that, but if there is a group for the Buffalo Bills where hope is a little bit of the plan, is that I think Sean McDermott, this scheme, and Bobby Babich is a perfect pairing for, as long as they've got the right types of guys, which I believe they do, and we'll get into that tonight, then I do have reason for hope. So we'll hopefully bring the rest of Bills Mafia into that here tonight.
Well, and I think one of the reasons that you can take it a step beyond just hope is those guys, specifically Babich and McDermott, have earned a benefit of the doubt that's beyond just hope. Like when they vouch for a personnel group and specifically this position and the level of play that's expected there, we've seen 6 seasons is enough for us to say that, okay, we can trust that this is, something that they have earned some benefit of the doubt toward.
Totally. And outside of, we'll get into the exact people and go through this person by person, but outside of Cole Bishop, who I'm high on, if you've watched anything post-draft there that we talked about, it's not like this is a bunch of nobodies either. They might not all be familiar to everyone in Bills Mafia, but these are all guys, even into the depth, that have lots of starts and lots of reps in the NFL, just not with the Bills. But I think they're all fits with what the secondary, at least to this point, has done. So that gives me a little bit of faith of, it's not like it's all rookies or guys that haven't had a chance to crack a starting lineup yet. You got guys that have played in big games, played in big spots, started for good defenses. And so that gives me a little bit more of a, buffer of, hey, we can bridge the gap between what we had seen. It might not be what we've seen in the past, but we can bridge that gap, at least for now. They've patched it together with pretty good depth.
And we'll talk about each of the names here in a bit, but there are, 5 of the guys here that I don't think you're going to get a lot of time tonight.
Yeah.
As we've done each week, we have our fun segment of, 2 Buffalo Bills and a lie, but it's really going to be all Buffalo Bills that you just aren't aware of. For the fans dialing in tonight that are watching in training camp, going to a preseason game, you may see these guys, but I don't think there's a really high likelihood of them making the roster. Corey Couch is one of the DBs and corners that are there. Kyron Brown is a guy who has floated around for a little bit here on the practice squad, so that's a name that has gotten some time on NFL rosters. He did play a couple games with the Rams and has had a chance to be out there. Kendall Williamson is a backup safety that's going to be out there fighting. Keni-H Lovely is another guy who is out there, in training camp fighting for a roster spot. And then one that we'll talk about when we get into the corners is Daequan Hardy. He's a guy that I think we'll talk a little bit about, but Brown, Couch, Williamson, and Lovely, I think there's an incredibly low percent chance of any of them making this roster. It would take an unfortunate injury or something really crazy in their performance coming in, because honestly, depending on which depth chart you look at, you can argue that Daequan Hardy and Damar Hamlin are the 11th and 12th guys on the depth chart, or that they're bumping out a guy like a Cam Lewis or DeMarcus Ingram or Dee Delaney. So I think this group has a little bit more of a defined line with who's fighting for a roster spot or not. And I think there's a 12 guys fighting for 9 or 10 spot, probably 10 spots. And there's 12 guys fighting for that. And then the other 4. Do you think that line is about right in your mind?
Yeah, for sure. And I think a couple of those names sound like a Key and Peele skit. And if we were playing the for real game, I would have thought that you just pulled those out of a Key and Peele's spit.
Keni-H Lovely and Corey Couch absolutely fit the Key and Peele sketch.
Sure. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think again, we're saying this week in and week out, Greg, and I don't want to sound like a broken record. I was having the same conversation with Derek and Bulldog this week on WGR of like, you and I have gone through every one of these position groups and talking about the depth side of this and what these kinds of decisions are. And it seems to keep being on like whatever the high side of the position group that you think, whether it's 6 wide receivers or 10 offensive linemen, we're having these conversations of like, well, there's like 3 guys kind of competing for those last 2 spots at all these groups.
Building a 58-man roster.
100%. And it's the new practice squad rules make this a little bit easier for the Buffalo Bills in terms of what they can do. Other teams are also probably not poaching as much, where they can keep some more veteran players. I think that's helped teams a little bit in some of these decisions, but Brandon Beane has gotten so much guff for the releases, the Black Monday and what they did on Black Monday and gutting this team and this new rebuilding for Josh Allen 2.0 run. But I think what's gotten lost in it a little bit is not even just the starters, but I think how good the depth is on this team, where we're having this conversation every single week this year in these previews is, again, Damar Hamlin's not a world beater, but the fact that we're saying like he's competing for a job legitimately, and people can say what they want about him. He's definitely a polarizing character, but he's a young player that has had a lot of starting snaps for a really good defense while he was in there. And there was a lot of good film while he was in there. Now we haven't seen him.
His health incident, like he was on a very strong trajectory of being the future of this team.
Potentially.
And that is absolutely in the range of possible outcomes that comes back.
Yeah, for sure. And he's going to be competing for a spot. And Dee Delaney, another guy that has had real starting reps in the league, might be competing for one of those final spots. It's a really interesting group. There's a lot of upside on the back end as well. You still have Kaiir Elam, who hasn't quite met his draft stock, but he's going to be in play for probably more of a role this year here with a new defensive backs coach. And so this summer, if there was a group that's like maybe the most interesting, where we don't know the starters at safety, who's going to be winning on the back end of this roster, like you said, like where's the cutoff for DBs? Also, we've talked a lot about special teams in these positional group things. And with the new rules, we know linebackers are probably going to be a big part of this. Or safety going to be a big part of how they cover those special teams, the new kickoffs. I think it will be.
So with that in mind, I think it's a perfect segue. First, let's hear a little something from our guy, William Attar, and then we'll break down the 2024 Buffalo Bills safety group.
If you've been in a car crash, you should know this. At William Attar, there's no fee until we win. That means you don't pay us unless we win your case. If you're hurt in a car, call William Attar, 444-4444.
William Attar took that Von Miller approach, right? We don't pay him unless we win.
Hey, I like it. I respect it. You put your money where your mouth is. It's the right way to do it. If the Bills would only follow suit, you only pay for your tickets if they win.
I would love that.
Right way to do it.
Yes.
So let's start with this safety group. And when we talk about who's here to help, I think it's a apt name for this segment because there's a lot of new names. There's a lot of guys here to help. So this safety group, there's only 2 holdovers from last year, Taylor Rapp and Damar Hamlin. Taylor Rapp only back for his second year. Damar Hamlin, the only real veteran of the group. And like I said, I think regardless of, I think there's a range of opinions. And you and I are on 2 pretty far opposite sides of the reasonable range of outcomes on him. I think that we differ on him as much as just about any player on this roster. The fact that whether we think he's firmly there fighting for a starting spot or fighting for his roster spot, the fact that that's even up for debate shows that they've at least added a lot of talent to the depth of this roster. So I don't think we've added anyone short. We'll talk about Cole Bishop when we get to him. Nobody knows what his ultimate ceiling is.
Yeah. We
don't have any superstar here. We don't have any guy. I tweeted directly at Justin Simmons just saying, hey, Justin, Bills Mafia, just wonder what you're up to. How are things going?
Right.
So, short of, and I do not expect that. I will say.
Did he respond? No.
He did not write me back. I was a little disappointed. He didn't. And now you can't tell if people like a tweet or not. I used to like that before, where you could see if who liked it. I don't expect that to happen, but short of something like that, which would be a shock again if they were to add someone like Justin Simmons, the fact that they have, I think, 5 guys all within the range of possible outcomes that could be a starter. I think it's most likely Taylor Rapp, Mike Edwards, who was with Tampa Bay for their Super Bowl, Kansas City for their Super Bowl last year, and now second-round pick Cole Bishop. The 3 of them very likely fighting for those top 2 spots. You mentioned Dee Delaney. He's a name that I think many people listening to this show have him in the group of Kyron Brown, Corey Couch, Kendall Williamson, and the idea of who is that guy? I've never heard of him. He's better than that. He played for Tampa the last couple of years. He played special teams. He played outside corner. He played nickel, and he actually played a lot at safety last year for them and played pretty well. So he's a guy who I actually think has a better shot at the roster than what people realize, although I don't think he's pushing to start. And then the real question is, which Damar Hamlin do we get back? Do we get the guy that had to come in when we lost Micah Hyde so early in that season and had to play a great deal of time through that 2022 season all the way up until the horrifying incident with the Cincinnati Bengals? And then obviously we've then seen, I think inarguably a different version of that player after that incident, and simply getting himself back onto a NFL field is, I don't think it's an exaggeration to use the term miraculous. It's crazy that someone's heart stopped on a football field.
Yeah.
And not only is he still alive to talk about that, he came back and played football after that. So not knowing which version of that we get, having those 5 safeties is very, very interesting, because I don't know that any of them can step forward and say, no, I'm the guy. I'm taking this role. I think there's, at least you can tuck yourself into a chance with all 5.
I think it's the 3-man race at the top, to your point. It's interesting though, because Edwards, a huge fan, wanted him since he came out in the draft. I thought in that draft process, he was going to be the perfect type for the Bills defense to
replace a lot of those boxes.
Yeah, and to replace Micah Hyde or Jordan Poyer long term, because knowing that they were going to age out or something was going to happen contractually where you weren't going to be able to keep both of them. That was like a 2 to 3 year plan, let him develop. Instead, he goes off, wins a couple Super Bowls, gets thrown into starting roles. Everywhere he's gone, he's ended up starting and playing in these big games. So you have that experience, but he has been hurt so far throughout the entire offseason program. I don't know how far behind the 8 ball that has put him. We don't have access to all these practices, what's gone on in those rooms. Has Cole Bishop taken some of this and run with it? He also had a little bit of a nagging injury through some of the offseason stuff. So where's he health-wise as we enter training camp? What type of jump does he take? I said it on the linebacker show that I don't expect the defense to be viewed safety centric anymore, but I think they're going to do the same stuff that they've always done with safeties. And so is he going to be ready to do some of the things that the Buffalo Bills do? Because it's a lot on a plate. I think there's a scenario where even though they're similar, and it's hard to really put strong safety, free safety on this safety group. I know that if you go to our lads or any depth chart, you'll see guys lined up in certain spots, but I think the scenario is probably going to be Rapp and Edwards to start the season. And then Colt Bishop has a chance to do what Matt Milano did with Ramon Humber and earn reps as the season goes on. Say one of those guys doesn't play up to his level, but that's kind of how I see the top end of that. And then to me, to your point of where's the cutoff with this DB room as a whole, it feels like it's Hamlin and Delaney probably fighting for that last spot with the hope that maybe you could sneak one of them onto a practice squad and keep a DB that can play special teams and come in and rotate as a safety in case of emergency. I don't know if you would be able to keep those guys on practice squad, but that's kind of how I see this room specifically playing out right throughout the summer.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because I think the one challenge is Damar Hamlin hasn't finished his rookie contract. So if he's released, he is subject to waivers because he's actually a guy that, because of how the team has treated him and handled the situation afterwards, I think he would want to stay here, short of having like an immediate spot to play somewhere else. He wouldn't go to like somebody else's practice squad. Yeah, that's honestly that's fair. Like if Pittsburgh offered a roster spot, Dee Delaney is a guy who is has checked his box from a veteran status standpoint, so would be eligible
and
to
no
hide
guaranteed
there.
money.
And
Right.
he doesn't have guaranteed money. And is a guy, so that's one that could come into play there. Is that a way that we do it? And we'll talk about it when we get to the corners, but I mean, some people have outright said that no, Cam Lewis is a safety. And I think how with the new, especially the fact that we have new position coaches for those spots, we don't know how they're going to view him. Is he a backup nickel? Is he a safety? We know that he's played on special teams, but they gave him, a little bit closer to real money. I will say money from the sense that I think he's going to make the roster. I won't call it a lock, but they guaranteed most of his money. So we're paying him $1.55 million this year, whether he's on the team or not. So that tells you that they're expecting him to make the roster. They gave him more than the minimum and they guaranteed the money. So it was like I talked about with Lyle Collins or Marquez Valdez-Scantling, or, there's different guys that when you see that Deion Jones and Chase Claypool got $15,000 guaranteed, and Cam Lewis and Marquez Valdez-Scantling got $1.5 and $2.5 million guaranteed.
Right.
That certainly tells you what Brandon Beane thought about their likelihood of making the roster. So again, we have seen it once. OJ Howard is the one example where a guy got guaranteed money in that season and then got released. So it is possible, but he's the only one. Every other example where guys got guaranteed money in that season, they made that roster. They made the team. So, I kind of think of him as a safety, but we'll leave him for the corner. I think he, even on the team depth chart, he's listed as Taron Johnson's backup. So we'll leave him there. The one comment we've heard out of the press conferences was Sean McDermott commenting on what a leader Taylor Rapp has been. And I think there's a fair amount of people that I don't know if like the usage we had last year where, obviously they moved Jordan Poyer down into the box as the dime linebacker in those sets. One, because of his physicality and his ability to play that way, but also just some acknowledgement of the reality of his range at that point in his career. So that also forced Taylor Rapp to have to play a lot of free safety. And I like interchangeability, but I also think his most value is throwing his body around in the box. And when he does play like a heat-seeking missile, sometimes a little too hot, I'm kind of excited to see where that comes from. So McDermott talking about him as, being the leader of that room. He did get more money than the rest of those guys and is, got a much more legitimate chunk of money compared to the rest of that room, and got a 3-year deal with some legit guarantees in his contract. I think that the way you described it is reality, in that Mike Edwards, almost every spot he's been so far, I don't think he's been the plan to start almost ever. but then he ends up playing a lot. 1 year in Tampa, he was like legit the starter with him and Antoine Winfield. Other than that, he's just kind of ended up being on the field for a lot of teams after injury, where he was like the first man up and he just happened to come in over and over again. So I do think it makes sense there, but I won't be shocked if it's Taylor Rapp and Cole Bishop earlier than we think.
Yeah, Rapp is a tough one for me because people know me. I'm usually on the over zealous side of DBs, especially with the Bills, and he's probably one that I'm the most down on. I'm okay with him being a starter. There's a lot to his game that I just don't like. It almost in Dorian Williams sense. He's a better processor, but he almost reacts too quickly. I think he gets beat when he does that. I think I like the way he pulls his trigger, but it's a little aggressive, overly aggressive to your point. Like there's a lot of friendly fire.
I was gonna chime in. I almost think there's been enough of that it taints a lot of people's opinion. Like almost more so than what the reality of his play was
Sure.
that I think he hurt like 4 of our own teammates last year in front. And I think that I almost think that's kind of tainted some of our opinion of him because he's done it a weird amount of times.
There's an optics to it for sure.
Yeah.
But I talked to Doug Farr, who is a guy that I like talking football with. He was on One Bills Drive recently, sort of even talking about this group. And I was asking about some of the comments that I've made, some of the hot takes that I've had on this defense, stuff like that. And we were talking, and he's real high on Taylor Rapp and really liked what he saw. And I know like the Bills are high internally on Taylor Rapp. The contract shows it. The way they've talked about him shows it. And so people are seeing something that I'm not, and I can't wait to see that. Because again, even when I'm down on a Bills player, I don't want what I think to be true. Like I want to buy into how high Sean McDermott and the Bills are on him. So I want to see that this summer. And then Cole Bishop, like as much as I like Mike Edwards, I loved Cole Bishop in the draft process too. We did how many mocks where we mocked him to the Bills? No, like, yes, this is perfect. Let's get him in here. I think he's a perfect fit for Sean McDermott defense. How ready is he going to be? Something I'm super excited to find out. But if he takes the job and runs with it earlier than expected, huge, massive win for the Bills to get a guy on a rookie deal, get in and get some of this experience as a starter in this defense would be massive. Big win for Brandon Beane in that draft process.
100%. And I think that when you first saw that deal announced this spring, it was announced as a 3-year deal worth up to $14.5 million. So there's incentives in there, but he got $4.85 million guaranteed.
Nothing.
A legitimate chunk of money guaranteed. It's set up realistically, it's $10.6 million. So it's actually much closer to like $3.5 million a year than the almost $5 million a year that the initial announcement did. But that also tells you that he's got incentives built into his contract where he can earn up to $5 million a year. And now you're talking about much more legitimate. So when you talk about the team's belief, I very frequently go back to, follow the money. They tell you with their wallet who they believe in and who they expect. Now that gets beat out, and guys, whether it's a later draft pick beating out an earlier draft pick, which of course we'll talk about in the corners, or a more highly paid player getting beat out by a lesser paid player, which we of course have seen in the past with, some poor investments along the defensive line and other spots. The situation still here is he is expected to be the guy. He was by far the biggest investment in that group. The rest of those guys were much lesser of an investment. Mike Edwards was kind of in the middle. He was around $2.8 million. He also has some incentives built in there and where his cap hit ends up. But $2.8 million is also a legitimate amount of money that tells you they felt like they had 2 starters going into the draft, and then ended up that their second pick was a safety because they picked Cole Bishop there, but that they didn't force it. It wasn't one where they had to make that pick. So we'll see. Both of us liked Cole Bishop. I was a little surprised that it was the second round, but again, that's just me getting caught up in whatever the mock.
But again, speaks to how much they internally
I think when we saw the embedded, they were anxious about him making it and almost traded up to get him. So they saw him as a, top 50 player on their board, which whether right, wrong, or indifferent, that's where they valued him.
And what that investment is. Yeah. I think either way, huge loss. The Black Monday from a fan optic perspective, still the national media. When I'm reading articles and things about what the Bills are expected to be this year, it's decimated on defense, and it's highly because of Jordan Poyer and Micah Hyde being gone and them being such staples for so long. And the way that they were able to brace that loss with at least 3 guys that are Cole Bishop expected as a second round pick to be a starting caliber player in the NFL. And then 2 guys that are straight up. I think Taylor Rapp and Mike Edwards can start at safety for most teams in the NFL. And then you have a guy that has 2 guys that have real starting experience in the NFL on good defenses. It's not the perfect solution to losing those guys. It would be cooler if Justin Simmons was in the building and you had like a real star at safety for this team to kind of bridge that gap. But I don't know, outside of getting a star, the way they build this safety room is really great insurance. And I don't know that they could have done it better. You have 4 to 5 guys here that all can come in and start, and you don't lose that. Like, the floor of this room with the loss that you had is, to me, hats off to Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott to build it out. And they're all fits for the Bills defense.
And I think it's also one of those things where so many of the pundits around the NFL are talking about the idea that we just lost peak Micah Hyde and
Correct.
peak Jordan Poyer, which, you know, I love those guys. I will always be appreciative of them. Those are guys who will be probably not quite at the Ring of Honor level, but will be in that, though there will be people calling for them to be added to
Wall
the
of
Ring of
Fame.
Honor,
Yeah.
Wall of Fame, you know, the teams, you know, their own version of that in the new stadium. But no matter what, we weren't getting that version either. So I think that there's a very good case that Taylor Rapp, Cole Bishop, Mike Edwards, whatever combination ends up on the field the most, they will be as good or better than what we would have gotten from those guys in 2024, even if we admit they're obviously not going to be, not obviously, it's very, very unlikely that they're going to be the all pro levels that we got at the peak of Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer. And that's okay, because the team in front of them on defense is better than many of the units that Jordan Poyer and Micah Hyde had to be the safety blanket for over the last 6 years.
Yeah, including this cornerback room, I think.
Switching over there, I'll get out of the way. It's fun that we're now led by our best cornerback is a nickel, but he's not only the best on our team, he's the highest paid nickel cornerback in the NFL. Taron Johnson getting all pro votes, getting the biggest contract in NFL history for a nickel corner. You have been one of, if not the biggest Taron Johnson advocates. Eric as well. Eric's been, you know, really out there in front of his abilities since we've been here. It's really, really cool to finally see the rest of the world catching up to the faith that you've had in him for a long, long time.
Yeah, I mean, it's been really cool to watch him. This has been one of the coolest things is this was another thing I was talking with Derek on WGR this weekend about, is this idea of Sean McDermott being such a conservative shell defense guy and outdated, and like he drafting Taron Johnson and utilizing him as this hybrid new version of nickel, where back in the day, Greg, it was
he plays a 192-pound man at linebacker.
Correct.
He uses Taron Johnson at 5'11", 192 as a linebacker.
And it used to be your third best corner, or your smallest corner would just be the nickel. And it was almost like a default thing. And now it's become a specialized thing where every year in the draft process, more and more guys that are coming in are nickel specific type players going to teams to be that team's Taron Johnson. And you're seeing it with Trent McDuffie is carving out a great role. Kenny Moore is right there leading the way with Taron Johnson here. But Sean McDermott and Taron Johnson have really revolutionized how teams use nickel. It's been talked about a number of times during this Bills run where teams try to force the Bills out of it, and they're like smart offensive coaches are trying to force them out of it, and they just can't pry them out of nickel. And they were ahead of that curve. And that to me is progressive coaching. That's progressive thinking on the defensive side of the ball and having the ability of Taron. So hats off to him for what he's been able to do. I love that he got paid. I love that that type of play that he's provided, along with the other guys I mentioned, have now made that its own all-pro position, because I do think I've pounded the table for this for years too, that it's such a unique position that I think it's probably the most difficult to play on defense in the modern NFL, because you're matched up against Tyreek Hills and shifty dudes, and they're off the line. You can't get your hands on them, and they have the whole field. Yeah. And you're passing off when you're in zone defense, you're passing off between linebackers, safeties, and corners. Like, there's so much to process and different roles to play. It's such a unique position now, and he does it just as good as anyone, obviously. And so love seeing him, and him being in the middle in terms of continuity with Matt Milano for all these years. And being, I know that when the safeties come in, he's going to be the guy kind of communicating some of the looks back to them, because he's seen it all. He knows what Sean McDermott wants to do. So him leading this is fantastic. But the guys next to him, Trey White had a higher peak than any of the guys we have on the roster in terms of one of the best corners in the league when healthy. But I don't think in the Sean McDermott era, we've had two starting corners as good as Rasul Douglas and Christian Benford, right? Like, we had a patch together. I love Dane Jackson. I love Levi Wallace. Super limited players that fit within the scheme, but their abilities just weren't always up to snuff with what we wanted out of that second position. Rasul Douglas, maybe not the top end that Trey White was at his peak, but still a very good top cornerback in this league. And Christian Benford, maybe one of the best kept secrets on the Buffalo Bills roster.
So I will say, like, if we're going to be objective, there has been some up and down play in the past for Rasul Douglas. He was great for us. He was fantastic when he came here. There was some up and down. There was a reason that he bounced around from Philadelphia to Carolina before really coming into his own in Green Bay. So I'm excited, looking forward to that. He's also, he's 29. He's going to turn 30 here. So I think that there's some cautiousness in exactly what we're going to get from him, but I'm excited. I think that his style of play fits perfectly in this scheme. He's aggressive off the ball, reads quarterbacks really well. He's incredibly intelligent. And that was the biggest thing that the Green Bay fans in the locker room were telling us on his way over here. This is a guy who might be a future, like, president of the NFL Players Association. Really, really smart. That's where his mind really comes into play, is when he's reading the other team. You see him playing. That's why we saw he gets his hands on so many balls in what he does. So
good run defender.
Yeah. He and uses his 6'2", 210-pound frame that's big for a corner. He uses that. He throws it around. I'm excited about him. I feel very, very good with him as our number one corner. The thing that I've actually had to bring myself back around on is, I think I underrated and didn't appreciate how good Christian Benford was last year.
I thought we were fighting tonight, Greg, about this, because earlier in the offseason, we had a bit of an argument online, and I thought we were going to fight, and I hate fighting with you. So I love that you said that just now.
I admit it. I was a little too low on him, and I was coming at it from the point of more so in appreciating the fact that Kaiir Elam has a fresh slate and has a clean start with the new coaching staff, with a coaching staff coming in that's more open to man-to-man play, that will allow him to fit into his skill set. And all that's still true. All that is 100% true. He has a fresh, clean start with the new coaching staff in the secondary anyways. And that, it's not a secret that John Butler was not a fan of Kaiir Elam's, and just having that weight lifted is great for him. And I hope that turns into a thing. But that doesn't have any bearing on the fact that Christian Benford was just much, much better than I realized that he was last year. And some of the numbers of what he really put together in the production that defense had was pretty crazy. And that I want to give credit to Uber Hansen, who played around with some of the different numbers. And if you look at the rate against and what he allowed on the season and when he was targeted and everything, there's some really, really encouraging and exciting numbers of what's out there compared to what other defenses and other guys gave up, and that he got his hands on a ton of balls, and the percentage of time where he was able to make a play on the ball, despite honestly, getting targeted a fair amount because he was an undrafted free agent and had Rasul Douglas opposite him and Taron Johnson in the nickel. So, of course, defenses as a default were going to go at him. And to hold up the way that he did when they tried to go after him was super, super impressive. And that you add in that, he did not miss tackles. Like he came up and tackled really soundly. He punched the ball out. He made plays on the ball repeatedly. He was better than I was giving him credit for and certainly deserved to go into this year definitively as the starter. And honestly, he might be better positioned as the longer term cornerback one than I realized, and that maybe Kaiir Elam is the succession plan for Rasul Douglas as he enters age 30. And his style of play, I think, is set up to age reasonably well because he's never been that good of an athlete to begin with. It's all been intelligence, reaction time, reading quarterbacks. So maybe we do have a second or a third year left. Maybe there's 2 or 3 years left from him, but he is a free agent after this year.
Yep.
And if Kaiir Elam pans out, that gives us options. I think we should feel better about Christian Benford. I should. You already were feeling very good about him. I had to bring myself back around as I prepared for this show. All the numbers just kept jumping out to me of like, oh crap, oh wow. Like over and over again, I just kept finding numbers that showed me how good Christian Benford was last year, and I think I underappreciated that.
You did my job for me. I thought I was going to have to come in here and defend Christian Benford as that guy. And it's really, this just speaks to the process that they do in terms of draft and finding the right guys. And even that's something John Butler talked about. Again, I reference it almost every single week. I'm pretty sure it was Centered in Buffalo podcast that he did. It might've been Tim Graham. Actually, it might've been the Tim Graham podcast.
He had great appearances on both.
One of those two podcasts where he was talking about the process that Brandon Beane and the staff puts into drafting and finding the right guys. And it doesn't have to necessarily be early picks. It's just finding the right type of football players for this defense. And you mentioned Christian Benford. You talked about Dane Jackson in that, and even a little bit of Levi Wallace. And Benford is everything we wanted, I think, in cornerback too. That even as much of a fan of Levi Wallace and Dane Jackson I was, there was limited athleticism, and he checks all the boxes they had, but with better athleticism, with plus athleticism still. And so it's really the perfect fit. It's the perfect marriage. And I like what you said about, I'm not off on Kaiir Elam as much as everybody else is. I didn't want to force him into a role as a starter. I didn't think he was ready for it. His play has been frustrated in terms of what we saw from him in college, being a handsy player, is still existing at this next level, and he's still getting called for it. He doesn't have the benefit of the doubt that Sauce Gardner does, where he can't get handsy with people without getting it called. But I do think that he can be a starting caliber player in the NFL. So again, the depth here is very good, I think, on this cornerback position. I think you do have 3 guys that can be starters, and we don't know what is going to happen with Rasul Douglas. I'm super high on him. I think perfect fit for the end of his career in the twilight years is with Sean McDermott in this defense, where they're not going to ask him to do anything crazy. They're going to let him play with his length and his smarts, and he can step right in and be that what Jordan Poyer and Micah Hyde were in terms of a leader on the back end of this defense. I think that the players in the room respect him, and I think he can be that kind of veteran leader, which this team needs right now. And then Kaiir Elam can still develop into this role. I do think there's going to be more opportunities for man, and maybe he's a rotational type guy when they're doing some of that stuff. And the team, we haven't even talked about him. We've been in this going now 20 minutes talking about these cornerbacks. I'm not super high on him yet. I haven't seen enough, but we know the team loves Jamarcus Ingram, and they love his athletic ability and size and style. And then you add in Cam Lewis, again, not a guy I'm particularly super high on. Utility player though, he's like the Swiss Army.
He's hung around long enough that obviously the team feels strongly about him. When you're
at the very least, with the way we're talking about roster spots and stuff, his ability to play special teams, his ability to play safety, we just talked about. Well, maybe he's actually a safety, but there is no other backup to Taron Johnson on this team, and that's a concern. But he at least is able to do that. He can play every single position in this defensive backfield, and when you're putting together a game day roster, maybe he's not the best at any of them, but having a guy that can be that rotational utility knife is such a tool for coaching staff to just throw him on the roster and know, well, in a bind, we can have this guy that knows how to do every single spot.
So I want to throw one other piece in there that I'm just going to utilize, because you brought up some of the points about this consistent ability to find day 3 defensive backs because of Levi Wallace and Dane Jackson and Christian Benford, and over and over and over again, stumbling across these guys that end up becoming really good values. And I think the default was that the first thing Brandon Beane talked about was his return ability. But I mean, maybe Daequan Hardy is that backup nickel. Maybe that's what he is. Like, I don't know that I'm ready to do that, but they picked him in the draft for a reason.
Yep.
And that they have a really good track record of their day 3 defensive backs. Out of any of the day 3 picks, we were really hot in round 5 for a whole bunch of different spots, but any of the later guys, the only ones that have panned out have been DBs. Anybody else, it's been somewhere else of where it goes. So I'm expecting his most likely path to be because he wins the punt return job and is able to be that. And I don't know that he will, but I think that's his highest likelihood. But I guess we have to be open to the idea that their track record on day 3 corners is pretty darn good. And if they pick Daequan Hardy, maybe Kaiir Lewis needs to be watching out for him, or maybe Jamarcus Ingram needs to be watching out for him, or maybe Damar Hamlin. Maybe they don't keep that many guys. Or wherever that goes, we are, and you've reminded everybody each time we've done this show, where every single time we talk about the 10th offensive lineman making it because there's so much depth, and we talk about the 10th defensive lineman making it because there's so much depth, and we talk about the 6th linebacker making it because there's so much depth. Well, Christian Benford, Taylor Rapp, Cole Bishop, Rasul Douglas, Taron Johnson, all locks. Kaiir Elam is pretty clearly a lock, I guess technically a trade. Mike Edwards is making this team. Then you get into, so that's 7 that are right there locked in. Dee Delaney, Jamarcus Ingram, Cam Lewis, Damar Hamlin. That's 11. We've never kept it. And Daequan Hardy's 12. So 12 guys at a minimum. 2 of those guys aren't making it because I don't think we're keeping 11. I think with the new rules at a minimum, I think we'll keep 10 again because we value defensive backs so much. I think 10 make it, but that means out of Dee Delaney, Jamarcus Ingram, Cam Lewis, Damar Hamlin, Daequan Hardy, 2 of those guys aren't making this team. And I think those are 5 NFL caliber players that it's going to be really reiterated. Right now, I feel the strongest that I don't think Daequan Hardy is going to be such a good returner that he forces them to make the team. But, I didn't think Christian Benford was going to make the team either coming out of that practice squad. So we'll see. But out of the 4, Damar Hamlin, Dee Delaney, Jamarcus Ingram, and Cam Lewis, one of those 4 guys isn't making this team. And those are 4 pretty good players.
I think so. I do think they're going to be able to stash some of those names into a practice squad, which will help them. I think that doesn't mean you won't see them this year. We've seen a lot of practice squad players come back in and play for the Bills, especially in the defensive back. It starts to go quick. No matter how many of these guys you think you have, when you get into November, you realize, oh crap, we need more almost every single year. And so having too many of these guys is a great problem to have. Hardy's an interesting one because didn't follow a ton of him in that draft process. But after the draft process, I found myself disagreeing with a ton of people who said it was really just special teams and that he was just going to be a returner because of that size. 5'9", 181, just isn't going to have the size to play at the NFL level. But the way he played, to me, in my novice eye, I'm not a film guy, but the way I looked at it, I think he can. I'm excited to see him at camp. I think he has a little bit of that Taron Johnson in him, that he plays a little bigger than
he played 1,100 snaps in the Big Ten. There's an awful lot of tackling that needs to be done in the Big Ten, and he found a way to do that. You don't make 50 tackles doing that with a pretty solid rate, not missing a terrible amount of tackles. He obviously threw his body around pretty well.
Yeah, and the nice thing is I don't think it needs to be a 2024 plan for him. I think that this can be a player that you stash on the practice squad and allow Cam Lewis to continue to be that utility hybrid player. But long term, we need something behind Taron Johnson and maybe to be the future Taron Johnson. He's going to age out of this quickly. That is just how the NFL works, right? And so I think it's a good pick. I'm excited in the development of that pick. Again, it reminds me of each week we've had Javon Solomon, we've had I'm going to butcher his name, Eddie
Odafuan Ulufosio.
Yes, Ufosio. It reminds me of this where it's like I see what there is to be excited about. I see why the Bills selected this person, but I'm going to pump my own brakes and make this in my mind, like give him 2 to 3 years to become the NFL player that I think he can be. But I think this guy is going, you will see him get legitimate snaps and be a legitimate NFL player, not just a returner on special teams. So could be a cool guy to watch.
Yeah. So I think that kind of wraps things up for this week, kind of showing us where these guys set, where everything is at. I think that there's a pretty firm top 7, and then there's another group after that we'll see where it goes. Being honest, I think I'm probably tainted. I want to give a shout out to our guy Chris Janke, one of the best around Bill's Twitter at knowing all the practice squad caliber guys. He's got an encyclopedic memory of who was on the roster at what time and who's been on what practice squad and stuff like that. He's great at that kind of stuff. He is a huge Jamarcus Ingram stan. And I will say Ingram has a lot of the Saran Neal body type stuff. Like he looks like a big physical specimen, especially for special teams. But he played 2 games 2 years ago and 3 games last year. So he's probably more on the outside looking in than what we realize. And that he's also a guy that we have been able to waive and get back on practice squad and waive and get back on practice squad multiple times back and forth. So if it comes down to it, keeping a Daequan Hardy, but waiving Jamarcus Ingram and rolling the dice that we can get him back on the practice squad is probably way more in play than what we realize. It's probably easier to do that than what we think. And there's probably not as we always worry every year. Oh my God, a guy's going to get claimed. The guys who get claimed are recent draft picks.
We've been doing that with Cam Lewis for 4 years. Everybody's like, oh, we can't cut Cam Lewis.
Yeah. And again, the guys who get claimed are the guys who are late round picks that also were graded as a late round pick for that other team, and they have the roster spot. That is why maybe there's a higher chance of Daequan Hardy making this roster than a Jamarcus Ingram, and that will probably influence where my projected roster is when we get into it.
Speaking of projected rosters, I'm not going to put you on the spot now at all because I'm not going to put on the spot, but think about it because I think that we, in talking through this, we didn't really talk about it necessarily outright here, but I think that we have a possible bet maybe to make here because I think you're going to say it's Delaney, and I think I'm thinking it's Hamlin for that safety spot. And so think about it. Pause.
Yeah, I'm
stash it in there.
On the line. I'm willing to put some chicken wings on the line.
Yeah.
I really like Dee Delaney. I was not familiar with his game beforehand, and when they did the signing, kind of dove in. It was like, oh, this is interesting. This is better than it is not a Leonard Floyd level move or anything like that, but was better than the normal late May, early June signing. It was like, oh, this guy played. Like this guy legitimately played special teams consistently, but had in-game experience at multiple spots and played 1,000 snaps in the NFL with Tampa the last 3 years. That's more than what a lot of the other spots were. And again, if we see that we get the Damar Hamlin pre-incident, that was a player with a very exciting future to the game. So if he's now in a mental position where he can let himself play with that reckless abandon that we saw before, I think that's really, really exciting. I hope that we see that. That would be really, really cool. I don't know that I've seen that yet, afterwards. So I think this is a really good spot. I can't possibly put myself in this position. All I can use is other analogies with things that we see like an ACL and with other situations that maybe there is something that, hey, he now proved to himself he could do it. Now that gives him maybe a little bit of the freedom or takes some of the weight off his shoulders that, hey, I don't have to have that anxiety of what happens when I do get hit? What happens when I throw myself at him? What happens when I fire my gun to go downfield, downhill and really try to take out a running back or a crossing receiver or whatever it is? Maybe that gives him that freedom to now really go back at it this year. And I think we'll find out. We'll know in camp and in preseason. We'll see pretty quickly if he's throwing himself around the way that he used to. And that would be really exciting because that's just one more option in this.
I think part of his issue last year too was circumstance, right? Like the reason he got in to play any snaps at all was circumstance of being the depth piece. But then when they brought in Taylor Rapp as insurance because of his injury and issue and uncertainty of whether or not he was even going to be able to play, it became sort of the odd man out. Even when there was safety snaps available, they went to Taylor Rapp. And so he wasn't even getting game day active. And so, yeah, we haven't been able to see, but I think it's a mix of probably needing a full season of being back at practice and getting his sort of sea legs of football back underneath him. And then now would be the opportunity of now you've got a full camp where you're healthy and competing. And I think there's going to be a legit competition on this back half. We're not talking about these two guys as like, hey, they're competing with Rapp and Edwards and these guys as starters. You're going to have your firm starting competition going on, but you're going to have the secondary competition for those final 2 spots out of 4 guys competing. They're going to give them plenty of opportunities to get it. And I think it's going to be some of the more interesting camp storylines is going to be the back end and how these guys are competing. So excited to watch. And it's one of the few spots where I think we have a bit of a disagreement of who's going to be when we get into our predictions. I think our predictions are going to be pretty bland this year, where there's not going to be a lot of arguing spots. But this might be one.
Yeah. I think there's a group of 6 to 8 guys when you take that last receiver group, the last offensive line group, defensive line, linebacker, DB here. Like there's a handful at each of those spots where there's probably only like 3 or 4 roster spots for 6 or 8 guys. And that's going to be the fun part to really dissect as we go into it here. But anything else that we want to give to the people here? What's coming up next? We're almost at training camp. The next time we're here, it's going to be because training camp has started and live bullets are flying again.
Yeah, dude, my sign says it all. I need football in the worst possible way. I hate it because it means summer's coming to an end and summer's dope and I love hanging out with my kids and stuff. But there's nothing as much as I like golf and it was fun watching golf this weekend and NBA summer league. I enjoy that kind of a little bit, but there's nothing like football, even training camp football. It just hits different. I need it in my life. I'm depressed without it. I want to see Josh Allen. I was watching some Josh Allen podcast on Barstool, watching him golf this weekend. I just want him in my life. And so I'm excited to get all this back.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. I need it to start. I need it to be back. I watched summer league basketball today. I watched the Cavs summer league game today. Just the first round pick play. I've been watching the WNBA with my daughter. I need it. I can't. I don't do baseball. It's just not my thing.
No.
I need football back. I need it.
Yeah, it's coming. It's coming back. But it also means training camp is going to be fun. I'm going to be out for a couple weeks, so people won't see me. They'll be seeing you here coming up. And it's going to happen quick, though. We're going to move through this quick. We've gotten through this part of the content calendar. And now we get to talk about real things. And this is where our job starts to get fun again. This is okay to talk about this stuff. I'm not going to lie to the people out there. It's not the most fun content is just going through the roster and talking about what we think is going to happen. Now we're going to get to start to see some of what's going to happen, and we're going to get to see new coordinators and how is that going to look. And so I'm getting real excited as they ramp up here to camp. And I also love seeing everybody showing up to camp, all the people that maybe don't get to experience Buffalo football and seeing it on Twitter. So if you're out there posting, know that I'm out there excited to watch it.
Yeah, I can't wait. It's so exciting. We're going to have a great team of guys from Cover One out there covering training camp. All kinds of fun stuff coming up. Great shows. As a quick shout out, make sure you guys check out the show Eric Turner did with Osiris Torrance. That went live on Monday morning. So that should be out there for everybody. Maybe Monday evening. I think it went out there for everybody. Make sure you're checking that out. Great show. But on behalf of Aaron Quinn, I am Greg Tompsett. You've been listening to Cover One Buffalo, and we are out.